DHT causes hair loss. You've heard it 1,000 times. It's plastered all over the internet. Every hair loss forum, every hair loss guru. It is the foundation of the most prescribed hair loss drug in the world, finasteride. But what if blocking one of the most powerful androgens in the male body is not only unnecessary, but a fundamentally terrible idea? What if DHT isn't the root cause at all? And the real picture is only now starting to become clear to us. In this video, I want to show you what emerging science actually suggests is happening. Because what if you don't have to choose between your DHT levels and your hair? Alright, chapter 1. Where did the DHT theory come from? The DHT theory started with a genuinely interesting discovery. In the 1970s, scientists studied a community in the Dominican Republic with a rare genetic mutation that prevented them from producing DHT. These individuals, although missing out on many of the benefits of having DHT, at least never went bald, even into old age. Important to note that these guys actually had normal levels of testosterone though. So the scientists eventually concluded that it was specifically the absence of DHT that appeared to protect their hair. That observation led pharmaceutical companies to utilize finasteride for hair loss prevention. Finasteride inhibits type 2 form of the 5-alpha-reductase enzyme, and this is the enzyme that converts testosterone into DHT. Finasteride reduces DHT levels by around 70% in the entire body. But even with near complete DHT suppression, as seen with the use of a more powerful drug called dutasteride, full reversal of hair loss still remains rare. And that fact alone should make us ask harder questions about whether DHT is really the sole cause or just one part of a much more complicated picture. Chapter 2. DHT is not the enemy. Before I go any further, I want to make something very clear. DHT may not be the enemy here. DHT is masculinity. It drives libido, assertiveness, confidence, muscle fullness, and cognitive edge. It is arguably the most powerful androgen in existence. And we're being asked to block it permanently, to maybe possibly or partially slow down hair loss. Ask yourself honestly, would you rather be slightly less bald or hormonally optimized as a man? I ask this because that is genuinely the trade-off that the use of DHT inhibitors is asking you to make. For some men, the trade-off comes at a serious cost. Post-finasteride syndrome is documented in peer-reviewed literature with reports of sexual dysfunction, mood changes, and cognitive issues persisting well after discontinuation of the drug. Something worth knowing before deciding to use it or anything similar. Chapter 3. The inconsistencies the DHT theory can't explain. If DHT were truly the root cause of hair loss, we'd expect certain things to be true. Studies looking for a correlation between systemic DHT levels and baldness have produced inconsistent results. To date, according to the available science, you cannot reliably look at someone's hormone levels and predict whether or when they will go bald. Here's another one that almost nobody talks about. Testosterone and DHT both decline naturally with age, yet baldness is far more prevalent and far more advanced in older men. If DHT is driving hair loss, why does it accelerate precisely when DHT is declining? That's a contradiction the DHT theory has never truly explained. Another interesting point is that DHT affects different hair on the body differently. It strengthens and promotes hair growth on the face and body, yet supposedly destroys hair on the scalp. Same hormone, acting on similar receptors, producing completely opposite effects depending on the location. The standard explanation is that scalp follicles are genetically more sensitive to DHT compared to follicles elsewhere in the body. But what does more sensitive actually mean? It is believed to relate to the differences in how the androgen receptors respond to DHT once it binds to them, triggering miniaturization in scalp follicles while stimulating growth in beard and body follicles. Same hormone, same receptor, opposite outcomes depending on location. The precise mechanism behind this remains poorly understood. The lack of convincing explanation is something the DHT theory has never fully resolved. Also, we would expect DHT to affect follicles uniformly across the scalp, but it doesn't. The back and sides of the head appear immune to miniaturization despite being exposed to the same levels of circulating DHT, and at the same time, it is the temples and crown that typically progressively go bald. The standard counter argument here is that only certain follicles carry androgen receptors, making them susceptible to DHT while others are not. But this is where we are going to dig a little deeper. There are clinical observations suggesting that hair transplanted from the back of the head to the frontal area can eventually begin to miniaturize. So if susceptibility were purely in the follicle itself, and if the androgen receptor on the follicle were the sole determining factor, then a resistant follicle transplanted into a balding environment should theoretically remain resistant to balding. The fact that this may not always be the case suggests the scalp environment itself plays a role in balding. So that tells you the problem may not solely be the follicle, but the environment it is placed within. Now, before I go further, I want to be very clear about something. I'm not saying that DHT has no role in hair loss. It clearly does. Blocking DHT does slow down hair loss in many men, but slowing a process is not the same as addressing the root cause. Paracetamol reduces fever, but it doesn't treat the infection causing it. DHT appears to be a significant contributor to the cascade of male baldness, but evidence emerging suggests that it may not be the initiator. Chapter 4. The real driver of hair loss. So if DHT isn't the root cause, what is? In 2015, researchers published a comprehensive mathematical model mapping the chronic mechanical tension exerted on the scalp by the surrounding muscles. What they found was striking. The regions with the highest chronic tension, the temples, the frontal hairline, and the crown, map almost perfectly onto the exact pattern of male pattern baldness. That correlation is difficult to dismiss. Chronic scalp tension triggers a process called mechanotransduction, a well-established biological phenomenon where mechanical force is converted into biochemical signals. Research suggests that those signals promote inflammation and activate a protein called TGF-beta1, which is a known driver of fibrosis in human tissue. Now, one hypothesis worth considering is that the inflammatory environment created by chronic tension may fundamentally alter what DHT does once it arrives in the scalp. One possibility is that the inflammatory environment created by mechanical stress fundamentally alters what DHT does once it is there, shifting its activity from neutral or even beneficial towards the fibrotic process that gradually suffocates the follicle. This may actually resolve one of the biggest contradictions in DHT theory. So DHT promotes hair growth on the body and face in environments free of chronic mechanical tension. But in the scalp, where chronic tension creates a state of persistent inflammation, DHT's effects appear to be fundamentally redirected. Tension, it seems, may be the variable that determines whether DHT promotes healthy hair growth or instead contributes to the fibrotic process that gradually suffocates the follicle. So together, TGF-beta1 and DHT, operating in this inflamed, tension-driven environment, drive fibrosis, the abnormal buildup of collagen that forms hardened scar tissue around the hair follicles. Studies actually confirm that DHT activates fibroblasts and promotes collagen overproduction, and specifically in the scalp tissue. And of course, that scar tissue gradually constricts the blood vessels supplying the follicle. Here is where the Botox evidence becomes particularly interesting. Botox injected into the scalp has been shown in clinical studies to reduce hair loss in men. Botox works by relaxing muscles. If reducing muscle tension in the scalp slows hair loss, that is direct clinical evidence supporting the idea that mechanical tension is the primary driver of the process. It is not definitive proof, but it is a compelling data point that the mainstream DHT narrative cannot explain. Another point is that research shows balding areas to have roughly 2.5 times lower blood flow than non-balding areas. Starved of oxygen and nutrients, the follicles miniaturize and eventually they stop producing hair entirely and are replaced by fibrotic tissue. At that point, reversal becomes extremely difficult. Chapter 5. What does this mean when it comes to treatments? This reframing has real implications for how you approach hair loss. Starting off with finasteride and dutasteride. They are clinically effective at slowing hair loss in many men, and that is definitely worth acknowledging. They work because limiting DHT reduces one of the drivers of fibrosis, though these inhibitors do nothing to address the scalp tension causing the inflammation in the first place. They do not reverse existing fibrosis, and of course, the main problem with these treatments is that they come at a serious hormonal cost. Minoxidil You've probably heard that this works, but only temporarily. That word, temporarily, gets repeated constantly. But explanations are hard to come by on what this actually means. So, minoxidil works by improving blood flow to the follicle. That increased circulation does provide some protection against fibrotic progression. This is through oxygenation and nutrient delivery to tissue. The real problem is that it is fighting against a process that hasn't stopped. Chronic scalp tension and the inflammation it drives are constant. This may be the reason why results plateau and eventually diminish. Not because minoxidil stops working, but because the underlying problem keeps compounding. This is also where microneedling becomes particularly relevant. Studies suggest that microneedling combined with minoxidil can produce significantly greater hair growth than minoxidil alone. So microneedling works by creating controlled micro-injury that stimulates collagen remodeling and improves blood flow. It may also enhance absorption of topical treatments, such as minoxidil, directly into the scalp. It can even help break down existing fibrotic tissue. So, as someone with currently elevated androgens, this framework shapes everything about how I approach my own hair health, whatever hair I have left at the age of 42. And this is exactly what I'm going to get into in my next video. In the next video, I'll cover what happens specifically when androgens are elevated through TRT or steroid use, and what smart steps one can take to get ahead of it in the context of hair loss prevention. So if you found this useful, please drop me a comment below. I'd genuinely like to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to follow this entire hair loss series. So as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.